Hey there, welcome to First Look. I'm hopefully coming to you this week from the state of Maine. If I'm not, something has gone wrong. But hopefully you're having a good week regardless of where I am. So thank you for being with us here today. So this week you get a chance to hear from someone new. This is Elizabeth Nicodemus, and she is a recent seminary graduate from Pittsburgh Seminary and is a member at Highland. And so she's not traveling too far to come over here and share with us. And so I'm very excited to have you hear her preach and to be able to view it later whenever I get to it. So, but I know what she's going to be preaching on. So we coordinated that. So that's nice. So, the passage for this week is Matthew 22. And in this season, if you've kind of been following along since we had World Communion Sunday, what I said is that this is kind of a season of us rediscovering our identity. Who are we? What is God calling us to? Kind of an evaluation time, a way for us to kind of check in with ourselves but also to say something declarative about who we are and what we care about. And we do that. One way we do that is celebrating where we've been. And so we have the Reformation banners, and we'll have Reformation Sunday. We celebrate that through World Communion. We celebrate that through the contemplation and discernment that goes into our stewardship season. We have All Saints Day, which reminds us who we are and who we've been. So we have all of those elements that kind of give us a weekly reminder of just who we were made to be, which I really love. And so this week we keep moving forward in that same vein, and we get to this parable about a wedding banquet. And there's a few stories in the New Testament about weddings. I'm trying to think about how often that is talked about in the Old Testament. I would have to really think about that for a second. But Jesus talks about it a lot, but you don't hear about it very often in the Old Testament, and I couldn't tell you why. But it's interesting, of course, that Jesus talks about weddings on a handful of occasions, not been married himself, and the fact that his parents became his parents when they were not married, which is just kind of, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, but it's just kind of an interesting fact that's where he sits. He sits mostly as an observer of the other. It's not like a self-experience. It's not like something his parents, I assume his parents got married eventually, but his origin story really comes out of this untraditional way of becoming family. Whereas these wedding stories are, of course, the most typical, especially at the time at least, the most typical ways that people became family. So that's just an interesting idea. That, are we supposed to kind of look at some of these things very personally, or more as an observation? But the story itself, I think, is I think the wedding banquet stories, and there's more than one. What I like about them is that they are the complete opposite of the experiences that most people are hoping to have when they get married, which is tranquil, and everything is working out exactly the way it's supposed to, and everyone is acting the way they're supposed to. It's the only day really that you just ask every single person in your life to be nice, because we don't really expect that on Thanksgiving or holidays. Like, we assume there's going to be conflict at funerals, at other regular events. We assume that real life is going to happen, but it's like, can we just for one day in this moment do something that's maybe ideal and healthy and just the way I want it. And so, Jesus takes those quintessential kind of pieces of life and examines them through a very particular lens, which is also interesting because so much of his parables are very practical. They're work related, labor related. They have to do with the management of property. They have to do with what we do to do the daily things. And then you have these wedding banquet parables, which are obviously very, very different and set a very different scene. And I wonder how intentional that is. And I can't say that I've looked into it. Why? Because this is a first look. But it does make me wonder, when does Jesus choose to give examples from the special times of life? And when does he choose to present parables that kind of depict the commonality of our lives? All right. Let's look at this passage and see what it says. Again, this is Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. It's nestled in between two things that are extraordinarily common and that happen all the time. Some kind of dispute between landowners and tenants. So the parable of the wicked tenants is the one that's right before this, and a question about paying taxes is right afterwards. And so nestled in there between these two depictions, these two scenes that Jesus has set, we have the wedding banquet. So here's verses 1 through 14. And this particular Bible reminds me that this story is also found in Luke chapter 14, verses 15 through 24. In case you have the time, I think it's always worthwhile to kind of cross-reference stories in the Gospels, just to pick up on any differences or contextual differences. All right. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son." So let me pause there first. I always want to address, as soon as we can, who the audience is or what the subject is. And so usually, right at the beginning of a parable, we kind of understand, is this talking about a broad idea or a specific instance? And it's usually about the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. And that's important because we need to consistently remind ourselves that as much as we apply what we see Jesus say to us individually, there's a huge percentage of the time that Jesus is speaking about these collective ideas or communities or a broader concept. The kingdom of heaven is like this, meaning society as it is made to be in terms of being a reflection of what God intends or what God intends for our future. So anything we see here it has a communal focus and consequence, and that's kind of where we're headed. Like, we need to look at that from that broader perspective. It doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences or guidance for the individual, but if it's saying the kingdom of heaven is like this, then we know to think about it in those terms. All right. Gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Which everything starts off badly. I mean, that either says something horrible about the the circumstances, I guess, that they're living in, that no one's willing to come, or the father, no one wants to honor the father, or I suppose the son. I mean, that the son is like, why are we going to go to a party for that guy? Like, that kid is awful. So in verse 4, starting from there, again he sent other slaves, saying, tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fatted calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. I think it's interesting that he appeals to their sense of guilt, their sense of obligation. And in there is there's something practical about, hey, look, if this was you, if you had done all this work, you would want people to come and make all that work worthwhile. That's the first appeal. It's not about, hey, we go way back, our relationship is solid, like, let's honor that. It's, can you think about what it's like to be me? Put yourself in my shoes. And I've already done all this work and spent all this money and used up all these resources. Please come and make sure that these resources are not wasted. Verse 5, but they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. Now, there's some clear representations there of people ignoring what faith is supposed to be, right? That some people will just kind of ignore it and go about their apathy, right? And then there's those who actively work against it, either with malicious intent or just out of some anger or hurt or something, or act out against that which is being offered. Verse 7, the king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burnt their city. I don't want to get distracted by that, but that concept, because I think it's a minor point, but that he enlists some justice in this moment. Then he said to his slaves, the wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone who you find to the wedding banquet. Those slaves went into the streets and gathered all who they found, but both good and bad, so that the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see his guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. So I'd have to look at what the expectations were when it comes to the why didn't the person have this, have what he needed? Why was that the case, that he went without, didn't have the right clothes on? I don't know the answer to that, again, because it's a first look, but my sense is that the point is that the person should have known, or the expectation would have been that the person should have known that they would have had to do that. That evidently everyone else did, figured out a way to do this, but this person didn't, for whatever reason. And you might think willfully, even though invited in, even though there, and that everything was good and secure and everything, that this person just simply said, I'm not going to do what is expected of me. A little bit, I think, like the parable of the two sons that we just read on World Communion Sunday, about the two sons. The one who said, I'm not going to do that for the father, and then does, and the other one who says, I will do that, and then doesn't. It's like, come to the wedding feast, make sure you do this, this, and this. And that person says, well, of course I will. And almost everyone does, except for this one person who doesn't. So that there's a deception kind of going on. So this story is thought about and interpreted, I think, with some subtleties to them. Like you can parse some things out in the with study when it comes to what does it mean to be invited? Why would you not have come? What were the social expectations? What were the what's the etiquette here? You can parse a lot of that out, and I think that that's really helpful in terms of understanding the overall landscape here, the scripture itself, why the story is told this way, what I'm supposed to draw from it. But of course, what we start to ponder, and again, since this is a first look, we're just going to do that together. What we're going to ponder for a moment is, who are the players in this story? Because usually what we do is we make God the one who's inviting, the father in the story. And obviously that makes sense why we do that. I don't know that that's always the purpose of parables, is to make God the dad figure or the authority figure, and then that all those the people are us, or are people who don't do like we do and are punished, and those other people receive a reward who didn't, who were invited. But it would be worth you kind of considering, what is the character of the person who is doing all of the direction in this story? We have a father who is invitational, who people don't want to come and honor. They're rejecting the invitation. They're basically then rejecting the son, and by doing so makes God, or makes the person, right, angry. And then so the father does something else, invites others. Now it's not just that there's a response that is expected from the people who get invited into the wedding. Hey, just bring people off the street. There's still an expectation of those people, goodwill in response to being invited in, meaning wear the clothing. But the invitation is given to them, and I believe that we're supposed to understand that as being gracious, that they're being received into something graciously. And I think that seeing God as the inviter, the son as the one who the banquet is for, the rich or those who thought that they were the righteous ones rejecting or being apathetic about the invitation, and then so God inclusively extending invitation to the masses, and but was still with an expectation that there would be some sort of response from those who are coming. I think that is a all well and good, absolutely more than fair interpretation of the story. I think that my initial kind of question is about trying to understand where we see some possible holes in that. And again, this is just my own way of looking at this story. You could run right at these analogies and really just hone in on God being one who invites, right? And that's perfectly legit. How does God invite? Who does God invite? In what ways is God invitational? Those are brilliant things to be looking at. I think some of the stuff that kind of jumps out to me that I would want to explore if I was exploring it myself more thoroughly is do the people who are invited want to be there? Or does everyone want to be there except for that one person who didn't put the wedding clothes on? And is that the sign that they didn't? Because, not every wedding that I am invited to am I excited to go to. Uh, you assume, I think, in the story that, of course, everyone would be excited to go to the wedding banquet, basically a free meal of someone that they maybe didn't know. And when you think about it like that, it seems like an odd request that, because he's not offering to pay their mortgages for life. He's offering to set them up with a buffet or whatever. And I think when I think about it like that, it kind of makes me think about the whole story a little bit differently. And then the rejection of the one who didn't respond correctly, meaning put the clothes on. It makes you think, well, first of all, would that person have the capacity of having those things? And then you start to think about that element. And what does it mean that person was completely rejected? It almost feels like they would have been better off not being invited at all. And so that kind of like messes with the analogy a little bit too. And so you have these, and then of course there's also we're not answering a couple of key questions in the story. One, we don't have any idea why the people said no, I'm not coming. It sounds like apathy and I'm too busy. And, if you're willing to kill the people who come to invite you, what on earth does that mean you think about the person who's doing the inviting in the first place? If you're willing to, that's like, killing the slaves of other people, to put it frankly, is, if nothing else, a crime. And so why are you willing to commit this crime in order to reject the one who's asking you this question, inviting you in? And it really says nothing to, I don't know what it says about the son, meaning like the one who this is is all of this anger, is all of this frustration, is all of this, is it towards the father? Is it towards the son? Is it both? There's just a lot about this parable, I think, that gets a little bit lost. And so I think what I'm really excited to see is how my friend Elizabeth decides to address this passage, given all the options kind of available to you. And every time a parable sets up this dichotomy between an owner that I think we normally say is God, and then the people, it gives us, and then the people who are responding to God, right? God's the initiator, God is the one who owns, who has, who whatever, and then everyone else is kind of responding to and reacting to what God is doing. And some of the actors in that, some of the players act well and some of them act poorly. So my question then becomes, am I supposed to see this story any differently than that? Because again, this is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like this. So it means that there is an invitational element to this story, and there will be a rejection, right? So within the kingdom of heaven, there is rejection and there is acceptance. So that's an important piece of it for us to understand about what the kingdom is like. But we also don't know why the people decide to reject or have apathy. We don't know why the people decide to accept. And sometimes it can be hard too to try to understand, what is this trying to say about our society, about community? How are we doing that? How are we not, since our community, our society ideally reflects what the kingdom of God is supposed to be like. That's part of it, right? So we, besides the knowledge that we know that some of us are going to have apathy, some of us are going to be downright cruel, some of us are going to be accepting, some of us are going to respond with maturity and with a sense of dignity, or with a sense of responsibility, and maybe others of us aren't. That puts a lot on our plates in terms of what to try to discern, how to best use this, because it seems like something that's much broader than simply some of you will be going to heaven and some of you will not be. And of course, the biggest piece of it is that those who are accepted, those who are brought in, who are invited and who are received, are not who we would expect. And that, I think, is always an important idea, especially if you're really comfortable in church. You get comfortable in church for a while and you start to forget parables like these and what they mean and what they imply for what faithfulness looks like or should look like. And that's a lot to ponder. And I kind of feel bad that I'm just going to ponder all those things and then just stop, because that's, I think, part of what this can do is it allows me to bring up for you a lot of things just to kind of be churning through, because ultimately what you want to see is, how does the person who's going to be bringing the word decipher that for me? Does she take any of these elements, or does she run with it in a completely different direction? Like, those are all things to be thinking about. But hopefully you can take just a few moments to read this passage and maybe the complement passage in Luke, and just spend a little bit of time thinking about it. How does it feel? Where do you want it to go? Where do you hope it goes? Where will you be happy if you hear her say this? Or where do you hope it doesn't go? And why? That's what I like about Scripture. That's what I like about contemplating sermons, is that we get to kind of discover for ourselves what we really need to hear, or what we want to hear, or what we find compelling. So that's what I got this week. So with that, thank you for being who you are. I look forward to telling you a little bit about Maine. Not the only reason you go on vacation, but one of the good reasons about going on vacation is that you always come away with, say it with me, something for a sermon, something you can write, and that's a great part of it. So I look forward to doing that. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time for another First Look. Take care.